We go to 32 teams and 32 shows. There we go, Kelley.
Yeah! Heading out west this time, NFC West time, baby. Last division left on 32 teams and 32 shows. We start with the Rams.
So the Rams. So we get to the defending Super Bowl champs to start off here. Not only your Super Bowl champions from a season ago, but the NFC West champions, 12-5 regular season record. They finish 7th overall in scoring a season ago. Defense was middle of the pack for the most part, and was for the in general a team that gave up a lot of passing yards, bottom 10 in passing yards allowed, but they got to the quarterback very well and were 3rd in sacks, 6th in rushing yards allowed a season ago, 15th overall in points allowed. And for any team coming off a Super Bowl championship, Matt, really where we start is, well, what do they do in the offseason? How much of that Super Bowl core can they keep intact? And so that's kind of right where we start with some of these offseason changes. And it really began in earnest with Kevin O'Connell being hired by Minnesota to be the Vikings' next head coach, leaving his offensive coordinator position.
Yeah, Sean McVay back, of course, and Sean McVay apparently announcing today on Twitter, on the Twitter machine, that he got an extension. So he is even more financially stable than he was even just
Sean
yesterday.
McVay.
Yes,
Yeah,
even yesterday, he is more
Good. I was
financially
worried about
stable. You were worried about it.
I was worried about him, man.
I know. The multi-million-dollar contracts at the early 30s that he had, you were really, yes, I know, you were worried about him.
I was worried about him.
He is good to go. Yeah, so Liam Cohen comes in, and he is going to be the new offensive coordinator. He served as the offensive coordinator at Kentucky last year. He's coming back. He was with the Rams in 2020 as the quarterback's coach. So he only left for a season, comes back, and is going to take over the offensive coordinator duties. That being said, we know Sean McVay has a ton of say in the offense and what goes on with the offense and things like that. So we'll see, exactly how much power Cohen has in all of this, but he will be the official offensive coordinator. Raheem Morris continues on as the defensive coordinator. Now, if you look at what this team brought in, not a lot. Now, it is some big names, but not a lot. Allen Robinson, Bobby Wagner, Troy Hill, really the only signings of note at all for this team. And, of course, Troy Hill was actually via trade. Allen Robinson comes in, a situation in which, if you look at his grades, despite very poor quarterback play, he has been one of the highest graded receivers in the NFL for several seasons outside of last year. Last year was garbage. He was actually like graded out like a 61 or something like that. But anything before that, he was an 80 plus. You're talking about a guy that has been one of the premier receivers in the league, despite the fact that he's had very little help along the way with all that. We know what Bobby Wagner is, and Troy Hill, definitely a big addition for there. Now, on the way out, some pretty big names and some pretty interesting names. Von Miller, gone. Your right guard in Austin Corbett, also gone. Defensive lineman Sebastian Joseph Day, also gone. So these guys are all gone. Robert Woods goes and signs with Tennessee. Darius Williams is gone as well. Sony Michel, not that makes all that big of a difference to you, but he is also out of town. Johnny Hecker, the best throwing punter in the league, is gone.
The most dangerous weapon in the league, according to Bill
dangerous
Belichick.
weapon in the league. He is also gone. Okoronkwo, the edge rusher, is also gone for them. So, there's a lot of guys that are out of town for this Rams squad. Now, they didn't have a first-round pick. They didn't have a second-round pick. Their first pick was in the 3rd round, so it's kind of hard to even replace some of these. Because, again, look, they went for broke. They got it, right? I mean, they laid their cards out on the table.
Forever.
Yes, they put their cards out on the table last year, and they won the Super Bowl. It worked out. It paid off. But that being said, no first-round pick, no second-round pick. Their first pick was in the 3rd round, in which they took offensive guard Logan Bruss. In the 4th round, they took a corner, and in the 5th round, they took a running back, Kyron Williams. So that's kind of how this has all played out for them. Now we know the big thing entering this season is what's going on with Matthew Stafford, and how do we deal with this Matthew Stafford injury. And Ben, honestly, this paralyzes me from this team, and I don't know what to do whatsoever with this squad. I mean, listen, we'll get into kind of what they have coming back and where these units rank out in the next segment, but it doesn't really matter to me all that much, all of the particulars when it comes to that. Whenever you look at the starting quarterback for this team, who is your veteran quarterback, your returning Super Bowl champion quarterback, and the drop to John Wolford, right? I mean, that is a massive, massive difference in what this team looks like from any sort of aspect here. I mean, I not that Wolford is a complete gutter trash or anything, but he's not Matthew Stafford. And Matthew Stafford's arm thing, there was some very disturbing words that were used. And we went over this. We talked about this earlier in the week about what was when we talked about this yesterday. It was an odd injury that was described as an odd injury for a quarterback. Right. And that didn't sit well with me, and maybe there's a little hyperbole going on there. And maybe this is just hey, let's not tip our hand that he's actually fine. But if he's not, and you start to hear these things about maybe he won't throw for another couple of weeks because they want to be extra cautious, there's just a lot of reasons for me to kind of pump the brakes on this team. I mean, they're plus 125 to win the division. The win total's sitting at 10.5. They are minus 250 to make the playoffs. You can get 2-1 on them to not make the playoffs. There are some interesting numbers out there on this team that I think, if anything, I would be playing the pessimistic side of any of this, right? It would be the no playoffs or the under win total or whatever, if you were forcing me to make a bet on this squad today.
Yeah. Well, and let's keep in mind the reality of how we usually approach a lot of these off-season developments, which is 95% of the time, because we are so close to the sun and we're talking NFL basically in some form or fashion every single day in the off-season. We are probably the most skeptical of the group of people to say, let's react to this to kind of the direction you're saying. But this is one of the rare times where you clearly feel, and everything we've heard so far, and Sean McVay, they called it this week part of the plan, quote unquote, for Stafford. He did not throw yesterday as they try to help him recover from the elbow tendonitis there that was apparently diagnosed. This is clearly a real thing, and it is unlike the vast majority of the other offseason storylines we get here.
And what it does make you wonder is at least from a win total standpoint, not necessarily maybe from a make the playoff standpoint, but if this is an actual real thing, and if this is an actual real thing that could linger, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I think it bears repeating. This team is probably pretty confident in them if they have a healthy Matthew Stafford that they can make the playoffs, even if he doesn't play the first month of the season. So is there a scenario we're talking about in 2 weeks where Stafford still hasn't thrown, where they're saying that's an option, right? Mm-hmm. We might sit him for the first few games of the year.
Could be an option. And we'll look at how the schedule plays out. Usually a tough gauntlet when you win a Super Bowl. We'll get into that, the roster construction as a whole, when we return here on Primetime Action. Okay, back to the Rams, 32 teams, 32 shows. We talked in the first segment of this, looking at Matthew Stafford, what we view this Rams team to be, given all of the concerns about his elbow and the throwing procedure and the plan that they have for him in the offseason. The other part you always have to ask yourself, Matt, on these Super Bowl teams you have so many guys who will, rightfully so, you get it, you win a Super Bowl, a lot of guys, they want to cash in and make some money and leave elsewhere. So you combine usually a roster that has at least some degree of turnover with a schedule that usually profiles to be among the league's tougher ones that the Rams are going to have. And that starts opening night when they host the Buffalo Bills. They will be a home dog to open a season. So from an overall roster construction standpoint, Matt, when you factor in the schedule here, if we're just leaving the Stafford issues aside, what do you make of where this roster is actually at position by position heading in here?
Yeah, I mean, because you take a look, and last year with everybody intact, it's the 5th overall team DVOA in all football. And that comes by way of 8th overall offense, 5th overall defense, and then 4th on special teams. And the reason I even bring up special teams, remember, they lost their punter, right? I mean, they lost their punter in the offseason as well. On the defensive side, of course, Von Miller out of town, so Sebastian Day is out of town as well. So, I mean, there is a lot of turnover there with that. I mean, if you look at the schedule here, another reason to not really love the prospects of this team just absolutely going crazy. It's the second toughest schedule in the NFL headed into 2022. And outside of the Bills in week 1, which the Bills, a Super Bowl favorite, you get at Tampa in week 9, at New Orleans in week 11, at Kansas City in week 12, and at Green Bay in week 15. So these are very, very tough games. Not to mention you have to play the Chargers in week 17 as well, a team that everybody's pretty high on and a team that everybody thinks is going to be one of the better teams in the NFL. So it is outside of just the division, which has some pretty tough teams in it as it is. You're facing all these other teams all over the place, specifically on the road for so many of these games. Tampa, New Orleans, Kansas City, Green Bay, all on the road, and then a week 17 showdown against the Chargers. You start to look at the schedule, Ben, it's like, okay, even if this team is good, you're just naturally going to lose some of these games. I mean, you just can't win all these games. You can't win all these games on the road, too, especially considering how jam-packed. I mean, Tampa 9, New Orleans 11, Kansas City 12, Green Bay 15. I mean, you are just going on the road, on the road, on the road, on the road, tough game, tough game, tough game, tough game.
And even though you get the Raiders and Broncos at home, you have the natural, and this is part of why they have the second toughest schedule, the natural cross division with the AFC West, which most people would tell you best division top to bottom in football this year, where you get a fourth place team coming to your home, where a lot of years that's okay. Especially as a defending Super Bowl champion, you'll be at least an 8, 9, maybe double-digit point favorite. That will not be the case with the Raiders in that Week 14 matchup.
Will certainly not be the case. So what you have here through the simulations at Football Outsiders, 9.5 wins. So a full game under their 10.5 win total that you get right now. They have them at 6 to 8 wins 26% of the time. So a quarter of the simulations, this team fell between 6 and 8 wins. 9 to 11, 44% of the time, and then 12 or more, 23% of the time. So this team getting to 12 wins happened fewer times than them landing somewhere 6 to 8 wins in the million simulations that that Football Outsiders ran of the season. So just to give you just a broad aspect of kind of how this could play out. 2022 DVOA projections does have this team still being really, really good. 9th overall offense, 5th overall defense, 15th special teams. It does have them falling pretty far on the special teams aspect, considering Hecker was one of the better punters in the league. So it does have them down a little bit from that aspect. If you look at Warren Sharp, he has them at 10.5 wins, so he has them dead on of where the number is right now. He has this offensive line is the 13th best in the league. The number 3 receiving core, the absolute number 1 front 7 on the defensive side of the ball, and the 9th secondary. Now, that kind of adds up and jives with what we're seeing from Pro Football Focus over on their side, Ben. Number 3 power-rated team headed into 2022. And I don't think, listen, all these articles and all these guides and previews and stuff were written before the Van Jefferson injury. I don't think that moves the needle really at all for this squad. So I'm not taking that into account, that,
totally
okay,
fair.
They're down with him. And, they have them as the 11th overall offensive line. They're going to obviously fall when a guy like Andrew Whitworth retires. He has been a stalwart in this league, one of the very best left tackles all the way up to when he retired last year at the age of 756. So he is approximately 756 years old. Now, Joseph Noteboom, who's going to step in at left tackle for them, in limited snaps last year, he actually still played very, very well. Like, he actually graded out really, really well. If you look at the pressures he allowed, super, super low percentage of pass rushes that he had to defend where he allowed pressure. So there is upside at that left tackle position, even though he is a youngster.
Only 5 pressures allowed in 142 snaps while pass blocking. And you would have to think, you would expect some sort of a downgrade just because of how good Whitworth was and how rock solid as a blindside protector he was for Matthew Stafford. So the natural question then becomes, well, we already know Stafford's going to be at least to a degree banged up entering the year. You would think the offensive line play matters even more. And to
you're
at
going to
least
start a rookie.
And you are starting a rookie in that mix, and also a run game that they really never committed to a season ago. And you'd have to think that's if you're Sean McVay game planning and looking at the play calling here, as you also get ready for a new offensive coordinator coming in, you got to get more out of the run game, especially when you have a quarterback who you probably can't have throwing 40 times a game like they had Stafford doing at times last year.
Yeah, I mean, at the right guard position, more than likely, unless things just go really sideways at camp, I mean, the right guard position is probably going to get manned by Logan Bruss, their third-round rookie, right? I mean, you're talking like a third-round rookie is going to be starting on the offensive line for the defending Super Bowl champion. So there was a lot of turnover, and there is a lot of things that could, in theory, go wrong. The pass-catching group, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, that's all I really need to say. You add in Tyler Higbee, who is still one of the top 10 receiving tight ends in the league. And then Van Jefferson's going to be back. He's out a few weeks. He's probably going to miss a month, maybe 6 weeks. So he's going to be back. Tutu Atwell is running right now as the number 3 guy in camp. And apparently, listen, again, it's everyone looks great season. So Tutu Atwell apparently looks great.
Looks amazing.
Yes, running is the number 3 for them. And, of course, Odell still lingers out there, and this would be a natural fit for them to just bring him back. And especially if Van Jefferson's only going to be out, 4 or 5, 6 weeks, something like that. If Tutu Atwell is actually looking good and can kind of fill a void there. You can ease Odell back in, right, because he's coming off of a major injury as well. If you have him for stretch run, if you have him for red zone stuff, if you have him for chain moving things, that's a pretty good addition to a team that has Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson, so that would be pretty interesting. Defensive line, number one in the league according to Pro Football Focus, and as you would imagine, anything that has Aaron Donald on it is certainly going to automatically just jump into the top 5, but then you add in Leonard Floyd, Ashawn Robinson, Greg Gaines, Justin Hollins, all of these dudes, they're all players. They are really, in Donald, Robinson, and Gaines alone, you have the number 1, number 11, and number 27 graded defensive linemen in all of the league last year on the same defensive line coming into this season. So you have 1, 11, and 27 out of 108 qualified defensive linemen that got graded, and you have all 3 of those guys starting on the same defensive line. It's going to be pretty good for them. And in the secondary, anytime you have Jalen Ramsey, it's going to be a pretty good secondary. They're going to have to throw away from him. No corner has allowed fewer yards in man-to-man coverage over the last 4 seasons than Jalen Ramsey. And he's basically, and you got to think about this, he's shadowing ones.
Right.
Without
exception.
Yeah. He's shadowing ones, and he's still allowing no yardage to get gained whenever he's shadowing these ones. And that's how just ridiculously productive he's been. They bring in Troy Hill. He's going to start at nickel most likely for this squad. And so the secondary is going to be fairly solid. So you have a good defensive line. You have a good secondary. You think that this is going to be, on the defensive side of the ball, as solid as they were last year. It really does kind of circle back to what are we going to get from an offensive production side here? What are we going to get from a new offensive coordinator? What are we going to get out of Matthew Stafford? What are we going to get out of, is Allen Robinson still Allen Robinson? We don't really know.
Yeah.
We don't really know. So for me, I'll put it this way. I'm timid. I won't say bearish on this team.
Yeah.
I will say timid on this team. And if someone came to me and say, I think that the proper thing to do for this squad is to fade them, look at all the losses, look at what's going on with Stafford, look at this wide receiver stuff. We don't know Allen Robinson's going to be great. Everyone's just assuming he is. And if you wanted to make that case to me, I would at least listen to you.
And let's point out, numbers have not really been adjusted since all the Stafford stuff came out. It's not like these have been altered just because, Matthew Stafford isn't going to be able to throw most of the summer. So this is still something where if you are feeling like this is going to be more of a significant, serious thing, then you might feel like you've got some inherent value there on some unders this year. That could be a potential. LA Rams. That'll be quite the team to watch. We'll see them opening night in the NFL.
Visit VSiN.com to get current odds, listen for free, find showtimes, and download VSiN sports betting podcasts.